developing a taste for music in the younger days. What were the particular qualities of folk and blues music that first drew your attention?
I think it's integrity. You know, I suppose, idealistically a very young, idealistic kid. I'd had quite a lot of experience in the world and its ways. I mean, grew up from a broken home, and I joined the army at 15, and I got out of that, and I was discovering music, and it was part of the culture, but I wasn't really affected by it until I heard folk blues stuff. And it was actually Jackie Elliott and Woody Guthrie songs that got me going, because they combined a wonderful sound to me on the acoustic guitar, which I've always loved, steel string acoustic jumbo guitar, with songs that had meaningful lyrics and said something about the working people, and coupled with the romance of the road. It was absolutely irresistible to me.
Do you remember any defining time when music became your main focal point, or really took over for you?
Well, yes, I think it would probably be an album which came out on an old radical label over here called Jack Takes the Floor, which is by a guy called Ramblin' Jack Elliott. Whenever I say Ramblin' Jack Elliott, I think of Ramblin' Sid Rumpold, who was on around the horn for years. But Ramblin' Jack Elliott, he was a New York guy, but he sounded more like a hillbilly than anyone I'd ever heard, and yet there was this beautiful guitar playing to my ear, and I just knew that this is what I wanted to do. I heard it, and I got a guitar, and I sat down, and I just sweated until I could make a reasonable pass at some of the songs. And from that time on, at the age of about 16 and a half, I was practically welded to the guitar. It was something that I reached for all the time. I mean, walking around the house playing, sitting down playing, someone would come to the door, I'd be playing, just always strumming away on it. And whenever I see kids that have got the same bug, I'm reminded of how it was for me at that time, and it's never really left me, actually. I was playing just 2 minutes ago before the phone rang.
Tell us about the London folk scene in the early 60s that you were a part of, and who were some of the first people you made contact with there?
Well, it's funny because, I think it's fair to say that the British sort of scene set the stamp on pop music and was re-exported to America, and it was principally the discovery of blues, so especially like 30s, 40s, and in some cases early 50s black music. And the folk scene seemed to split along two lines. There were those who warbled away like Joe Byers, and there were those who wanted to be an approximation of Bob Dylan, and there were those who just wanted to play the guitar good. And I was probably in the latter group, wanted to play guitar good. And when I heard Bob, I was deeply touched by his song to Woody Guthrie, and I learnt a couple of his tunes, although he wasn't playing the guitar as well as I wanted to play myself. So in the beginning, we'd go to a folk club, or we heard about these places where acoustic music could be heard, and they would be everything from sea shanties to songs of radical protest to sometimes a visiting American, and they had been quite big in the 50s, but only in a kind of, and I say big, there was a rediscovery of folk music, but it wasn't until the Young Pretenders got up and started playing, trying to play Lightning Hopkins or Mississippi John Hurt, or in my case a bit of Blind Boy Fuller or Big Bill Broonzy or something like that, and they began to let in the young guitar freaks like myself, and we gradually, I think then the beginning of the songwriter thing came with the advent of Dylan, and it was a nice thing, especially in London, because it attracted people from all over the country, from as far afield as, well, even Scotland. I mean, Bert Yance drifted down from Scotland in the early 60s, and he was an eye-opener to us, because he kind of combined traditional songs with this wonderful fiery guitar style, all-finger style playing, and little Johnny Martin, age 19, John Martin was down, and Roy Harper, and John Renbourn, Whiz Jones. These were all wonderful guitar players, and we were about to change the world, man. We were ready.
At the moment, and our guest was the Hickory Nuts. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Well, there's another thing. I think politically speaking, bluegrass was really a music of the Deep South, and not really. I mean, there was not such thing as politically correct music, but I was always a bit dubious about it. But I could flat pick at a fierce rate. I can't do it anymore. Well, I'm relearning actually. I've been using a flat pick lately, and I had developed a style which I thought was what these guys were doing, which was thrashing away at the same time as picking a melody out. And these guys heard me one day in a club in Croydon when I was, they were only the same age as me. We were all about 19 or 20, and they weren't happy with their guitarist at the time. They said, would I be interested in joining them? They were thinking of going pro and buying a van and travelling, and I thought, oh, I'd love to do that, but I said, I've got no money, I can't buy the van. They said, don't worry about that, just come and join us. And I learnt, it was only 3 chords. Most bluegrass is only 3 or 4 chords, of course, and I started picking for them, and we only had about half an hour's worth of material, so we used to have to do it all twice. And in the end, I think Pete, the banjo player and unofficial leader of the group, used to say, do a few tunes in the middle, Ralph, they'll forget what we played and we'll do them all again at the end. And so that was how it was, and that was really how I was kind of, I suppose, kick-started into playing a little bit on my own, which I loved. I played cocaine blues and a bit of finger-picking stuff, and sang a few songs, and it was lovely to get all the applause just for yourself, you know.
Yeah.
And it was great. We had some great times. I think our world tour ended after about 4 days in Birmingham, when the promoter ran off with all the money, and we managed to busk enough money up to get enough fuel to get back to London, and we gradually drifted apart, but we've remained friends, and they were very happy days, and we had a good laugh.
You mentioned you did a bit of busking in those days. Looking back now, how important do you think that was in terms of your grounding as a performer and a live working musician?
Well, I don't think it helped me as a performer. I think the street is brutal, as any busker will tell you. It is brutal out there. I mean, why should anyone stop and listen to you? And if you're not trying to entertain, what are you doing there anyway? I mean, so it's brutal. You've got to get out there, knock out a few tunes that people recognise, hopefully get a captive audience, and when you got enough to pay for a bed for the night, that was enough. And then I stopped. I never saw it as a career move. I always wanted to play much more subtly than you can ever play on the street, and but I would say that it did help me development wise in other areas. It made me face up to the harsh reality of the world. I mean, you have to if you've got no money and you've got no means of support, and you can play a bit of guitar, you make contact with the street, with the kind of people who work and operate on the street. You have to find your way into accommodation, cheap lodging houses, and know how to balance your budget and get, just about feed yourself and so on. So in that sense, it was a very educative sort of thing. But I wouldn't honestly say it helped me as a performer. That was something that you slowly acquire, I think.
Now, you almost turned towards a teaching career at one stage, didn't you?
Well, it was like this, John. I was a young married man with a son, and I had a handful of O levels, and my rather checkered past qualified me for at least to apply for a teaching job. And I felt, well, I didn't know what I was going to do, and I had a son to look after and a wife to take care of, and it seemed that I ought to get a proper job. And although I wasn't actually academically qualified exactly to do that, they said because of my past that I could perhaps offer something in that line, or my experience counted against the fact that didn't have very many exam results. And so I did a year, but by that time my career, as it turned out to be, it started to take off, and I was coming into college from different directions almost every night because I was working all over the country, and in the end I just had to make a decision. I said after 1 year, I just said to her, what do I do? She said, you've got to do music, haven't you? And it was as simple as that. And she's been fantastically supportive all the way along, and that's what I did, and never looked back.
Is there a particular point in time where you felt you really started to develop a confidence in yourself as a writer and indeed performing your own work?
Probably about last year, actually. I just began to I was on the stage one night, and I was playing, and it feeling good, and the audience were laughing and clapping, and we were all having a great time. And I just suddenly thought, I didn't say anything to people, I just thought, this is wonderful. This is absolutely wonderful. There's these people here for me, they like my songs, they pay to come in, and they're clapping at the end, and we're laughing, and what a lucky bloke I am. Maybe there is something to this after all. For many, many years, I carried to the stage my doubts, and I had to be, won over by the applause each night, earn my satisfaction from performing. But I don't ever walk out on stage underestimating an audience, but just from that moment on, I thought, God, this is what you do, Ralph. You're a lucky man. Enjoy it. And it's, I say it's fairly recent. I have to be honest. It's very recent.
How did your first recording deal with Transatlantic come about?
Well, it's quite romantic actually, because I'd been in Paris playing for quite a while in 1965, 66, and I came home, and one of my idols, if you like, a guy called Whiz Jones, said to me, "Look, Ralph, my partner's not coming back from Italy for a while." He was a banjo player called Pete Stanley. He said, "Do you want to come down to Cornwall and fill in till he gets here and play with me?" And I said, "Oh, I'd love to, man." I was just got back from Paris. Cornwall's in the west of England, at the southwest tip of England. It's a lovely part of the world. That's where I'm speaking to you from right now, except that it thinks it's a cloud at the moment. It's pouring with rain. But it was a wonderful summer. I came down to Cornwall, and we played in a pub, and we packed the place so much they sacked us. They couldn't cope with all the kids trying to get in. It just shows you what a different age that was. We went from there to a folk club where we set up a residency, and before very long we were running 4, 5, 6 nights a week and packing it out. And I tell you honestly, John, I've been to Australia and all over the place, and people still walk up to me and say, "You'll never guess where I first saw you play, Ralph." And I say, "Yes, it was in a little bar. I bet it was a little barn in the middle of Cornwall somewhere." And 9 times out of 10, they say, "Yeah." And it's amazing how many people wander through that place, and I still meet them. I can't remember the actual question now. I've got to this point, so you have to ask me that again.
The recording deal.
Right. So I'm there, and I'm playing away, and I'm gradually getting the confidence to slip in 1 or 2 of my own songs. And one night, a guy came up to me and said, "Oh, I really like that song about Paris." And that was one of the words in it. I said, "I've never heard that before. Where that came from?" And I said, "Oh, I wrote that one." And he went, "Oh, did you? Have you got any more?" And I said, well, no, not really, but 1 or 2. And this guy didn't say anything, and he turned up again a bit. He was a little bit older than me, 6 or 7 years older than me, and then he asked me again, "Was that one of yours?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I used to be in the music publishing business," and he got so cheesed off with the cynical attitude of Tin Pan Alley that he chucked his career in and came down and got a job as a postman down here in the rural little lanes and byways of Cornwall. And his name was David Dearlove, and he gave me a letter to send to a publisher up in London called David Platts, and they asked me to submit a demo tape. I had no idea what they meant, but obviously it meant me to record these songs, which I did, and I sent them to them, and they asked to see me, and I turned up, and they said, "Thank you for sending the songs. We don't think much of them, but we'd like to keep you on our books just in case." And here's a little tip for anybody that may be thinking of sending demo tapes. I really just forgot about it and carried on having a great summer. And somebody one day recorded a track in the club with the audience clapping and laughing and singing along and all that sort of thing. And we sent that, not thinking anything. And when the publisher heard the response from the audience, it was that sort of said, "Hey, maybe there's something here." And they introduced me to Transatlantic Records, who signed me on a 9-month holding contract, which meant I wasn't to sign for anybody else while they made up their minds. And I foolishly signed it. And at the end of the 9, or I think it was at the end of 3 months, they changed it and gave me £50 advance and signed me up to a 3-album deal. And that was that.
Did you feel you adapted well to the studio environment after being a working live performer in the past?
No, I don't think so. I have had terrible trouble in the studio, and if I could get anything like my live appearances down on tape, I'd be very happy. I have made some progress in that direction in recent years because I have insisted on playing and singing at the same time. And of course, most producers don't like you to do that. They want you to wear headphones and they got separation and do things separately. Well, that's not the way I work, and I think my recordings have been tentative and heavy in some respects, if that's the right word to use about an acoustic guitar player. But it's so antiseptic, the recording studio, and I would have loved to have been able to record like Bob, just going with a string of words, set them up on a music stand and say, I'm only going to do this once, boys, get it right, you know, and that, like Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, that didn't hurt him, but I think they always felt that I was within a hair's breadth of crossing over to the real pop world, and everyone tried, certainly Gus Dudgeon tried, bless him, in the early days with me to get me to record like that, and I still have to be shoehorned into a studio, really. I still don't look forward to it very much, but I've got to get the songs down. You're
not a real studio hound?
No, I'm not really. I admire those who can get on with it, but that's not really my forte.
How difficult was it in those early days to mix in, obviously, what would have been a heavy performing schedule and travelling, and also trying to take time aside to develop yourself as a songwriter as well?
Well, I didn't. There's a short answer. I just travelled and played and looked after my family as best as I felt I was able, and the songs would be percolating away up there in the old brain box, and occasionally, you know, when the house was still and quiet, I would sit down and try and shape them and refine them. But with sleeping babies and apartments in what we call council flats here, you had to be careful about noise levels and so on. So I was rather a muted performer and composer, and it wasn't until we had our own house that was a bit detached and I got a piano in it that I could maybe make a little more volume. But I still mostly compose late at night when everyone's gone to sleep. I find I cannot actually uninhibitedly work at any music if there's anyone in the place, because I tend to perform. It's the same in the studio, you know, there's a guy sitting behind the desk and a producer, and you do the song and you almost expect a round of applause at the end of it, not to say, okay, that's very good, let's do it again. I mean, I can't do that, so I usually have to wait till the house is very quiet, and then the songs, if they're ready, trickle out.
Now, how prepared do you think you were for coping with the notoriety and the success that came with Streets of London?
I wasn't at all prepared. I had matured somewhat as a performer, but that doesn't prepare you for pop stardom, and pop stardom is the antithesis usually of the integrity with which you normally begin to play your instrument and to compose your songs. I was absolutely horrified when I heard about bands sort of forming as a career move to make money. It was just something that was not ever part of the equation. It was a pure intent, and to be sort of viewed as a pop star because one of the songs you'd written had appealed to the the mass public, and then for everyone to be looking for the follow-up or whatever, I was just totally unready for it. I met some great people during this time, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are some fantastic people, and it's incredibly exciting. You can see why people get quite intoxicated by it all. But it truly wasn't what I wanted and what I thought. And up until this point, I'd ploughed an honest furrow, you know, through the music thing, and had achieved what I'd done without any major media support. I mean, things were written about, and of course I had records out, but I wasn't subject to the hype and expectations of the business. And I was not ready for it. In fact, I was so distressed after my band and various other experiments failed to deliver what I'd hoped, that I quit for a while and had another think about it. And it was really my brother, who was my manager at the time, and the fact that I was reminded of the intent when I began to play music that nursed me back into it, and I have not seriously looked back since then.
Did the song at some stage become a source of annoyance to you in the sense that it took up too much of people's attention when looking at your body of work?
Well, very well put. Yes, it did, actually. I mean, you think, thank you very much, and I'm very happy that you like that song, and I hope that it served as an introduction to all the others, but that is really almost wishful thinking, because it's a monster. It is a bit of a monster. It's a pleasant monster because it's a nice song. I'm not ashamed of it in any respect, although I do think that it's a very young song. I think I've written much better songs. I don't expect them to communicate on the same level, but actually, over the years, I've had time to reflect on the fact that one song of mine is known pretty much everywhere in the English-speaking world, and I have to take some pleasure from that, and thankfully, I don't ever get tired of performing it. You know, it's an expected song in the repertoire, and I'm happy to do it. In fact, two or three nights ago, I was performing in Swansea at the Dylan Thomas Festival, which is one of our great poets, great British poets, Welshman actually, but one of our great modern poets. And they have put a festival together, and I did a piece of work on him, and for the first time probably in maybe 10 years, I did 2 concerts without performing the song, and I felt like a naughty boy having a cigarette behind the bike sheds. It was great.
Let's talk about the songwriting process for you. Do you tend to carry songs around with you for a while before you actually get them down?
Very seldom, John. What happens is I have an idea that's a title maybe, or a few words. I think I got to work that one up, and or sometimes a guitar riff. But actually, the process is entirely. It's like, you know, going into the shed with a bit of wood and coming out with a clothes horse, hopefully, or something like that. You know, I mean, I have to really work it. I think only once in my life have I ever woken up in the morning like you see in the films, and the guy goes, runs down and plays the piano, and hey presto, there's the song. It's the one you dream. And that one was a song about a unicorn that I wrote for a kids' TV series, and that was the only time, and it really happened. And afterwards somebody said to me, well, really, the tune is actually Gasoline Alley or something. So it wasn't quite the inspiration I'd once thought it was. So no, I have to get at it, get the guitar out and sit and beat the thing into shape.
You do a lot of editing when you're writing, and to tinker around with your songs a bit?
Oh, constantly, yeah. I mean, one of the things that drew me to Dylan Thomas's work is the fact that I saw some of his worksheets for poems. Songs are completely different to poems. I mean, hopefully they rhyme and they have meter and they scan. But the art form is complete. I think poetry is probably the highest, one of the highest forms of you know, that sort of word art, if you like. And seeing Dylan's pages, he would make hundreds of corrections. A line it's almost as if he was weighing it in his hand, and he searched for rhymes. He never used a rhyming dictionary. He lists dozens of words that might be applicable later on, and his sheets of work are covered in corrections, and if he changed one comma or one word, he'd have to write it out again. And my own pages of work, I mean, I don't work as hard as that because I don't write poems, but I write lyrics, but they are corrected and edited and shuffled around and verses discarded and so on, and even after they're recorded, they sometimes change a little bit, and somebody says, you didn't sing that the way you put it on record, and I'm quite convinced I did until I check it out and maybe a word or two's changed here and there. But yeah, I'm pretty ruthless.
If you had to pin something down as your best quality as a writer, what do you think it would be?
Not writing too much. Just saying, not just sort of filling up discs with yards and yards of mediocrity, you know, just for the sake of saying a thing. I think I'm getting harder. It's harder and harder for me to commit to an idea and a song. That I think I try to bring to songwriting what Steinbeck, I think it was Steinbeck anyway, said a short story should be. You've got to be sure you want to say what you're about to do it, and you're going to be sure that you're going to say it in the most poetic and moving way you can. You're going to try and add something new, because there's nothing new in the world to write about. You could try and come at it at a different angle, and you're going to try and say it as short as possible. And if you can do those 4 things and add a good tune, then you got a song.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you have dabbled in songs for children. Many great folk artists over the years also have done this. Have you enjoyed that kind of writing, and how does the process differ from when tackling your usual material?
Well, for a start, I think I think of children as little, small adults, and because their fears and doubts and insecurities and things are much nearer the surface than adults. In other words, adults acquire skills at disguising these things. It doesn't mean to say that kids can't see through a phony. First of all, you haven't to patronise them too much. You've got to use pretty much the same attitude that you would use to adult songwriting, but find something that will make them smile and make them laugh. Now, I would or reassure, and that's pretty much what I try to do in my grown-up songs anyway. So, the difference was here I had to come up with a certain number of songs in a certain time. So one of the things that happened to me is I had to write quicker than I normally would do. And these subject matters weren't my choice. But in so doing, I was able to look at the things that most kids' songs, good songs, deal with, like a triumph over some sort of adversity, courage, being brave when you're a bit frightened, being, brave about the dark and all that sort of thing, being kind to other people, considering other people, those kind of things which are, it's an old-fashioned word, maybe worthy, but they were things that entertained me as a kid, and put in this TV series, we were able to make them a lot of fun. And I'm delighted to say that even though I was forced into writing quicker, and I've come up with one or two that seem to have stood the test of time, and kids are still singing them and enjoying them. And the added treasure is that one of my own kids, age 3, sang on one of the records, and he's 20 now, and it's a constant source of delight for my wife and I when we hear his little voice singing Sally the Seal or whatever, from the album. So that has been quite a lot of bonuses for me. I haven't done any since, but they may come again. I wrote about 100, I think, altogether. Wow.
Now let's talk about your upcoming trip down here and touring in general. You're a regular visitor down here, and obviously there's a loyal following for you down here. It must be comforting to travel to the other side of the world and find a loyal audience ready and waiting.
Aren't I lucky? I feel a very lucky man. I really do. I love coming to Australia. It's like I've written a song recently for Billy Connolly's World Tour of Australia, which I think goes some way of expressing my feelings about Australia and the fact that we're on the other side of the planet, and yet there are threads that bind us together. And although we're as far as we could possibly be from where we come from, there's a nearness. You can feel your own ones there as well, and I feel that very strongly. And the fact that we can communicate, we share a common language and everything, and we link together through the past. It's been absolutely tremendous to me. I feel much more at home in Australia in many ways than I do in America, and Australia's been particularly good to me. I mean, my first ever gig in Australia was the Sydney Opera House. Now, where do you go from there? It's just fantastic. And over the years, I've made some really good friends, and it's just somewhere I look forward to playing. And this year, it's the first time my wife's coming with me, and she's never been, so she's really looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
And I'm also touring with my old mate Eric Vogel, which is always a pleasure. And so we'll have a good time. We're really looking forward to it.
How will the shows actually be structured with Eric? Alone, together, I guess, as well?
Well, Eric has expressed an interest in the song that I was mentioning that I'd written for Billy, and I'm hoping that we can at least do that song together. And because, there's no egos at all involved with Eric and I think some nights he'll close the show and some nights I'll close the show, whatever seems right, and we'll be delighted to be in each other's company and to share the music with the people.
Terrific. Does the touring process in general still have the same appeal for you today as it does in the past, or has in the past?
I have to be honest and say that it's been a long time on the road, and that one does start to creak a little bit, but I can honestly say when I'm rolling and I've got a good team around me, I look forward to each day. And where are we going today? It's like, where are we going today? What are we going to do today? I never never really got caught up in the rut of club work, and so it's the adventure rolls on for me, and I'm still very enthusiastic about it all.
Have you found audiences have changed much?
It's difficult to say. When I started out, and I'm sure when Eric started out, it was the thing. Acoustic music was the thing. So they've thinned out a bit, as like our hairlines probably. There's not so many of them now, but I'm always optimistic and always especially pleased when I see a new generation of people in the audience. Often they're kids who want to play the guitar or who are made to learn Streets of London at school and want to come and see the old geezer who wrote it. But they've changed. Have they changed? I don't know. I don't think they have. I mean, I think they're still affected by the fact that one guy with a guitar can bring, a shared collective sort of experience to the stage and enjoy that without being bright lights and thump and too much noise and volume. No, I've got nothing against that either, but there is something very special and intimate about a guy with a guitar or a piano saying things that you believe yourself and perhaps weren't able to articulate. Or I think there's still room for that.
Oh, yes.
And I'm pleased that the audience has still come along and share that.
What about yourself and your own on-stage persona? Has that altered much in time, do you think?
Oh, yes, I think it has. Yes, I think it has. Listening to a Ralph album in Sydney, an album which came out as a result of that Sydney Opera House performance. It was recorded live, and a few weeks earlier in London, or a few months earlier, I'd played at the Royal Albert Hall, and I suddenly thought, well, we were going to make a live album out of the Albert Hall album, and we put the two together, and I came up with the title Ralph Albert in Sydney, and it's recently come out on CD, and I listened to it for the first time ever. I think that sounds probably, don't find that hard to believe, but I never listened to it. I let somebody else say it was okay, and that was it. And I listened to it, and I was listening to the way I introduced songs and so on, and I could hear a much younger man there talking, and I've got better at that, I think, and I've enjoyed it more, and thankfully I'm still not the old cynic I'm supposed to be. By the time you reach the age I'm at, supposed to be cynical, and I'm not that, but I've changed quite a bit. I've toughened up a little bit, which is necessary for survival, but without getting cynical, I hope.
And will you be trying any new material out on us when you're down here?
Well, I'm glad to say there's partly as a result of me not being over for a while, an album came out a couple of years ago which has not been promoted properly in Australia. So I hope that some of these songs that I'll be playing will be new to the Australian audience. Although if they've got the records, the last record, they will know the songs, but they're always a little bit different in performance. But I haven't been. I've been writing some autobiographical memoirs in a text form for the last 2 or 3 years, and I haven't written any songs until I wrote the one for Billy for the World Tour of Australia. So I'm in a fallow period at the moment. Anyway, and that's all right because it's. When the ideas come, they'll be worth waiting for, I hope.
I believe you did a bit of radio work yourself recently for the BBC.
Yes, I had the privilege of doing an acoustic music program, which has been running in England for years and years and years, and apparently it was for the chop, and they asked me to come in and sit in as the old guy that running it, a guy called Jim Lloyd, had done a wonderful job for many years, was retiring, and so each week I got about 50 CDs to listen to, and I never listened to so much music in my life, and I was incredibly reassured by the quality of the music that's coming through from a lot of young musicians, especially out of Ireland, which is amazing, fond of wonderful traditional music and great new songwriters and stuff. And so I played some of that and mixed it up with some of my own taste, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I went from being really dreadful at it to not quite so dreadful by the time I finished. So it was a wonderful experience, and I think I hope I should be doing some more.
Oh, terrific. Okay, Ralph, look, I won't hold you up any longer. I want to thank you for your time. What's on your books after you leave us?
Well, when I come back for the first time in about 20 years, I'm not going to do an autumn tour in England, but I'm doing a couple of Christmas concerts at our South Bank area, which is on the River Thames, the Festival Hall complex, and that's in December. And then I think probably in between that and that, I hope to have laid some tracks down for a new album, and then in January a brand new album. Definitely, I have run out of excuses for not writing any songs, so that's what I'll be happening.
Great, plenty for us to look forward to, and we're certainly looking forward to catching you down here. You're in Melbourne.
Thank you very much.
On October 10 in Melbourne, and we've all got that penciled in, and we'll be waiting here for you with bells on.
Okay, mate. Thank you ever so much, John. It's been nice talking with you.
You too, Ralph. Look forward to seeing you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
All the best.